Okay, good evening, everybody, and welcome to this amazing YouTube premiere. We are so delighted this evening to have with us David Boulding. So, David, I was lucky enough to discover in my endless research about the criminal justice system and FASD. David obtained his law degree from the University of British Columbia in 1987. And in 1988, he started his own solo law practice with a focus on legal aid, criminal immigration, and family law. Um, and then in 2000, a judge, Judge C. Truman, invited David to present at the Vancouver Conference of Fetal Alcohol and Law. The resulting papers, mistakes I've made with FAS clients, touched a tender spot with many and was widely read and eventually translated into French, German, Japanese, and even Australian. And since then, David has spoken domestically and internationally on the topic of fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, or at the time when he was first involved, fetal alcohol syndrome, and the law to judges, lawyers, social workers, and the probation service. And for me, as a relative newcomer in comparison, and as a parent, carer, and also my role at the Hub, I felt that his knowledge, expertise, and very long history in this area would be a great subject for us to talk about on a webinar, and very, very beneficial to our families and the communities and us all moving forward. So first of all, welcome, David, and thank you so much for joining us. And first of all, what time is it where you are?
Lunchtime.
Lunchtime. So it's 8 o'clock in the evening here in the UK, and it's lunchtime for David. So first of all, I've just got a couple of questions. What first drew you to working with individuals with FASD in the criminal justice system?
Well, I was working with them all the time. I didn't know it. And I had a case that made no sense to me at all. And most lawyers are, after they become a lawyer, most lawyers get their education from conversations in the courtroom cafeteria. So I was talking to a very senior probation officer, Bill Ellis, and he was eating his soup, and I'm trying to ask him questions, and he's just, yeah. And so I told him about this crazy case. And between mouthfuls of soup, he said, must be fetal alcohol. I had never heard the words before. And then I had to do some research. And then I started doing more research, and it's overwhelming how many of my clients. That's how I got started.
So how
You have
would
to
you
know what the
explain?
problem is.
Yeah. So how would you explain the connection between FASD and criminal behavior to someone like completely unfamiliar with the condition?
Well, there's a long answer and there's a short answer. The short answer is my clients have brains where pieces are missing. And fetal alcohol is a brain-based invisible birth defect. And so there's no broken arm, there's no heart-lung transplant. You have to do a lot of work to sort of put the pieces together. Simple story is when your brain is missing pieces, you make bad decisions. You can't do a whole host of things. And we can talk more about that lately, but the bottom line is because of the alcohol, the brain is missing pieces. And I'll explain that in greater detail later.
Fabulous. So I'm going to ask Sylvia to just step in here and talk to you a little bit about the legal system challenges that are faced across the world, really. So over to you, Sylvia.
Thank you, Joe. Hi, David. So my first question for you today is, what are the most common misunderstandings about individuals with FASD in the legal context?
It's not just the legal context.
Mm-hmm.
It's at school, it's in the hospital, it's at the grocery store, it's everywhere. And here's the most baffling problem. all of us have a little voice in the back of our head that when we see somebody do something, we say they shouldn't get away with that. So you have a police officer who sees something and says, "You're nicked." And then it gets like a snowball going down the hill, it gets bigger and bigger. The problem is we see things and we think you and I, Sylvia, have a complete brain. We see things and we go, click, they shouldn't get away with that. So the assumption is everybody's got the same brain. Well, obviously that's not true, because if you work as a lawyer for a while, you realize about maybe 10% who knows what the number is, they're psychopaths. And everybody knows who they are. And then there's the people that got drunk. And there's all these categories of people. But we still believe that they all have the same brains. And that comes from England. I think it was 1854, but you could correct me. A Scottish fellow called MacNaughton was charged with murder. One thing led to another. And they made these rules called the MacNaughton Rules, which, you can legally translate them down to if you knew it, you're guilty. Well, the problem with Mr. MacNaughton and the Privy Council rules is they were written 12 years before Sigmund Freud was born. What did they know about brains? Very little. But we have 150 years of legal precedent that says about what insanity is, because in those days, that's all they knew about brains. You put people in a big stone castle, locked them up, and fed them twice a day because they were insane. Well, it's a bit more sophisticated today. And I should tell you about some resources later, but we now can take pictures of brains. We know so much more about brains, and there's one fact about brains that we haven't quite figured out yet. The human brain is the most complex thing in the universe, and we know very little about it, but we've learned so much more. So the problem that the legal community faces, on one side, they've got science, and judges aren't neurologists, and then they've got 150 years of saying you're not going to get away with this. And so what essentially the problem is, a judge hears from a good lawyer, some nice social worker, a couple of doctors, that he's got a brain with ABCD problems, and then someone says, yeah, it's permanent. So the judge immediately thinks, well, he needs longer in jail. So we have some thinking have to correct. And I think in the next little while, I'll give you some hints about how to stop that thinking. But it's not easy. It's not easy. Women didn't get the vote in my country until 1922. And I mean, the legal system is like a glacier. Maybe that's not the best thing to say during global warming, but we have a lot of emotional issues. Judges and lawyers are all upper middle class people, and they don't like people hurting their stuff. And so when the policeman sees somebody do something, he doesn't stop and say, I wonder what his prenatal development was. They don't ask those questions. And if you're taking notes, I recommend that you phone up the Lethbridge, Alberta Police Department. It's a small town in Alberta where all the oil is. And they have one police officer. It's a town of about 50,000 people. And they have one police officer that deals with all the fetal alcohol problems. So if there's a slightest sniff that this kid is not right, the other police officers phone him up and say, Keith, come on down. And so what that small town is doing is using their brain, because most of law is emotional. People get really angry. You punched me, you hurt me, you stole my car, you broke into my house. And no one ever asks all of the questions before that, like what happened? And so consequently, it's very hard for people with fetal alcohol in the system because they just don't get it. And the people in the system don't get them. So it's like ships passing in the night. And I think Sylvia, we'll get more into that later, but that's the start.
No, thank you so
Next
much,
question.
David. That's yeah, really great explaining it, kind of the misunderstandings and, you know, the perception of like the lawyers and the judges and the police about fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. So thank you. And just my next question is a bit more about diagnosis. So what barriers would you say exist to getting a diagnosis or consideration of the FASD in court cases?
Well, Sylvia, it's obvious. It's money.
Right.
How many people are going to stand up in Parliament and say, "I'd like 10 million pounds to deal with fetal alcohol. I'd like some money to educate women the dangers of drinking while pregnant." What is Scotland famous for? Whiskey. Can you imagine someone standing up in a Scottish Parliament and say, "I'd like to have an ad campaign warning women about the dangers of alcohol when they're pregnant"? These are very difficult people. I mean, it's a $1 billion industry, and it is very difficult because the diagnosis. Uh, here it is right here. Here's something Canada did in 2005. They published a diagnostic guide in 2005, and so they started this process since 20 years ago, and it's been developing and developing. But it takes a long time. And the main problem with diagnosis is, yes, of course, it's money. Yes, of course, it's having skilled people. But the main problem is we have to teach people like you, like a court reporter, a court worker, a social worker. We have to give them the tools that they can kind of get a sort of good answer. And I've got some things we can talk about later, but we cannot depend on neuroscientists because A, they're too busy, and B, they're expensive. So you want to have more and more people in your organization go to trainings, go to learn something. Like here's something right off the wall. There's something called the Vineland Scales, VINE land scales. And it's a psychological instrument that you don't give to the person, you give to everybody that knows him. So all of the people that know the person answer this psychological inventory, and guess what? It's a very good predictor that you need further work. There's something not right here. And other people, Julie Conry, I remember I showed you the famous doctor from University of British Columbia, has a tool called Alarm, and we'll talk about that later, because you have to have this grassroots education. Because if you think that in every shoplifting case you're going to get a neuroscientist to come in and say, "Here's my diagnosis," uh, you've had too much scotch. And I think that if you teach more people the sort of like the basics, it will filter up. Here's something which I think you should do. I'll say it crazy, but you buy this book by Diane Albin, go to your local judge and say, "Judge, here's a book we'd like you to read. And if you have any questions, we'll come back in a month and we'll help you through it." Judge, it's 80 pages. And I've had clients do that. I've had clients walk down to the courthouse, make an appointment for lunch for a judge. They're ordinary people. As long as you don't talk about a case that they're in front of, say, "Here's some judicial education." And judges aren't stupid. They like to know new stuff, but they got to know about it. Does that make any
That's so
sense to
true,
you?
though. Yeah, that's so true because we use that Diane Malvern book as sort of a Bible of everything that we recommend to people. And I
Yeah.
think it's really true. It's like empowering people to actually advocate, which is probably the majority of the things that our service do when we bring families in, is helping families advocate for themselves in all sorts of different areas. But that book is just such an amazing resource, I think. Sylvia, on you go.
On I go. Okay, well, I mean, you just mentioned kind of advocacy. So my next two questions are about support and advocacy, David. So my first one is basically, how can lawyers effectively advocate for clients with FASD, especially if there's no formal diagnosis yet?
Okay. I've been thinking now for the last couple of minutes, and I've read your questions for, I guess, 2 or 3 days now, and I've got answers, and I will answer them. But and that's a real big thing with me, but versus and. And I think, with your permission, I'd like to spend about 5 minutes doing some preparation work so my answers will make more sense. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah.
Yeah, of course.
Okay. Okay. Drum roll, please. Um, Number one, this conversation could be 3 hours or 3 days long. This is the tip of the iceberg. And we have to understand that there's a great deal we all have to learn. And I mentioned it earlier, but I want to make sure you're clear. This is mostly an emotional problem. Parents and caregivers are exhausted. Judges are exhausted. Police officers have had enough. So you're talking to people who are essentially at the end of an overtime shift all of the time. So, especially with parents and caregivers, you have to find ways to talk to them when they're open, and that makes it very difficult. So, um, thinking about that, I have 3 demonstrations where it might make it easy, but you have to play along with me. And I've done this in a room with 1,000 people in it, and I've done it with 20 people. And you'll find that when you get an audience to participate, they're with you. So what I want you to do is rub your hands together like this, and then put your hands like this so they're a flat disc. Okay. Now, what I want you to do, and you're going to make a fool of yourself, so it's okay. Take your chin and rub your chin around the edge of your fingers. Okay. That flat disc is the baby's brain at 9 days. And so what happens is brain development goes like this. That disc becomes a ball, 2 hemispheres. So go back. You put something on the edge of the disc, alcohol, and then it develops into a full brain. Well, the stuff on the periphery, those are the deep core structures of the later brain. So that tells you what you've killed, the deep core structures of the brain. Okay. So here's brain 101. Hold your hand up like this. Take your other hand, and we're going to go like this. This first brain is called the snake brain. That's the brain that's responsible for breathing, metabolism, eating your food, digesting your food, and it's the brain for excretion. It's also the brain for sex. Then you take your next brain and you put that over on top of that. That's called the dog brain. This is a bit of evolutionary theory. So then you have the dog brain. It's got a fancy name. And then the next brain is take your 2 hands like this, and you're familiar with this left half, right half of the brain. You have the right half. Well, that's called the chimpanzee brain. These are gross generalizations. Well, a snake to a dog is a big improvement. From a dog to a chimpanzee is a huge improvement. Then take your fingers, and you're going to laugh because you got to take your glasses off, Joanne. You got to grab your forehead by putting your hands inside your eye sockets and grab the top of your head. That top of your head, that's the frontal cortex. That's the human brain. That's Shakespeare, Mozart, Man on the Moon. So now you've got a sense of brain development. And so neurologists want to know what part of the brain has been affected. And they got pretty good evidence of how to do that. Well, here's the trick. Take your fingers, put it like this. Your brain is a sandstone pyramid that's 99 floors high. Okay. You and I have 99 floors of brain activity. Okay. Some things we go to right away. Okay. My clients have a brain where there are skylights. In this solid sandstone pyramid that you and I have, they have skylights. There's holes in the brain. There's missing parts. So you and I can have an incident where our brain immediately goes to floor 87. Well, maybe their brain only goes to floor 75. You and I can have something to do with our brain, and we go exactly to that right department. Well, if their elevator is not working very well, if their left half and their right half of the brain aren't really communicating very well, or there are pieces missing, if a message has to go to ABC and B is not there, brain function is reduced. And the cause of that is alcohol. Alcohol is a solvent. And the best way I can describe it is take your chair, put it in front of you, and walk around the chair. Okay? Your alcohol. Well, alcohol is a very special substance and it goes in between the cell wall. So now alcohol is not just around the chair or the brain cell, it's inside the cell. So now you have alcohol on both sides of the cell wall. Well, the doctors will tell you what happens. It's called cell death. What happens is this, that cell goes, and it's not there anymore. It's not damaged. It's not bent. It's not there. So in terms of brain development, if that is cell number 12 in a stream of 16, it goes 9, 10, 11. It can't connect. So you have a brain where the connections are just not there. And there's a great deal of research on this, and we can talk about that later. You look up Ed Riley at the University of San Diego, who's done a lot of research on this. He's retired now. And the one you really want to look up is Kathy Sulik, Sulik, University of North Carolina, at the Bowles Institute for Alcohol Studies. Her career was taking pregnant mice and feeding them drops of alcohol, and then taking the babies, mice, and slicing their brains and looking at and making pictures of it. She got so good, she could make a birth defect on demand. So you go to her website at the University of North Carolina, and you can see pictures of these brains, and she shows you what alcohol does to brain development. Now, you can't bring that into a courtroom, but you can tell your lawyer, but you can tell your social worker, you can educate them to exactly what there is, because there's an enormous amount of research out there that people need to be aware of. And I think one of the problems we have is so obvious. Parents are exhausted, police are exhausted, and there's so much we have to learn. And so you have to be gentle about how you talk to people, because they've had it. They've had enough. Just getting through the day for many parents and caregivers is job number one. And you want them to read all this stuff. So it's really interesting that you're choosing a video, because that's a pretty good way. You can turn a video on and off when you've had enough. And so I think that's probably the best intro I can give you. I think the big thing
that's
about
amazing.
spotting.
I think it's amazing to, like, we talk about a lot of this in our training about brain development, and both Gemma and Sylvia and I all deliver training, but I think it's so great to hear different ways of explaining things as well. I think that's like is so useful for us to hear that coming from your perspective as well, because that, you know, means that if that's how you understand it as somebody who is a professional and has had all this experience, then surely this has got to be something that we use within our training and within our advocacy work and supporting our families. So Sylvia, do you have another question?
Yes. David, my next question was basically, what role do families and caregivers and educators play in preventing individuals with FASD from becoming involved in the justice system?
Again, this is a 5 or 6 hour answer. The number one is supervision. Number two is repetition with heart. And I don't mean say it once or twice. I mean thousands of times. People put certain rules in your family house, and the bottom line is, here's my business card. If you can't write the rule on the back of the business card, stop, try again. People put rules on the back of the bedroom door, at the back of the front house door. People put them on the mirrors. You want to repeat, repeat, repeat with heart. Something I recommend people do in smaller communities, and it works, is, and I'm sorry, I'm going to say son because it usually tends to be sons. The women don't seem to get in much trouble. That's changing now, of course. But you put together a binder with a picture, with everything you can know about your son, any medical records, any school records. You put together a binder. You'll use this binder for all kinds of reasons. You give it to your lawyer. But one of the things I ask people to do in small communities is find a police officer that's fairly well high up the food tree. Constable probably not high enough, and you say to the constable, go down to the police. They make an appointment. This is my son. He's 14. He's 12. You're going to be seeing him. Trust me. He has this problem, and I want you to have this binder, and I'd like you to meet him. And if you could do me a favor, could you just put him in handcuffs and put him down in a jail cell for about 30 seconds? Now, you may laugh at that, but I've had clients where that experience they have never forgotten. And then I tell people all kinds of silly little things, waiting till the one that sticks, because you never know what is going to stick. So you repeat, 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 repeat. And I tell clients, here's my business card. You're always polite to police officers. And you show this card to the police officer, and you tell the police officer that my lawyer says I am to be polite to you and not say anything. Quick story. This is a son of a woman with a PhD, and she was quite concerned. So she had this 14-year-old son, and he was hanging around with the wrong kids. So we spent a lot of time with him. Here is my lawyer's card. I am always to be polite to police officers, and I'm not to say anything until you call my lawyer. Okay, it's the Canadian version. I don't know what it is in England. So what happens is one night, there's been some break and enters and some kids get caught. And there's about 6 or 7 of these kids, 5 or 6 police cars, and they're all adventure. Well, my guy, according to the police officer, my guy is standing at attention with my business card out like this. He's not moving. And the police officer said, look, you go deal with that. I'm kind of busy, because the other people are all well known to the police. And so this guy finally says, yes, my name is, and this is the name of my lawyer. I am to be polite to police officers all the time. The guy talks to him a few minutes. Well, 6 or 7 kids go to jail. He gets a ride home, because the police officer realized by his rigid body language, by his repeated, I'm to talk to police officers. I'm always to be, Mr. Boulding says, I am to be polite. And so the police officer can say, okay, there's something going on with this kid. Okay. And so that worked for him. I've been thinking about this, Gemma, and this is not very helpful to you, but what we did is, and various jurisdictions have done this, and I think that every jurisdiction should do it. You're going to have to do your own, because the law in England is different than the law in Canada. It's minor details. But we have what are called police information cards. And it's a little card with some words on it. And on the other side is his picture. His picture, his address, and his caregiver's phone number and stuff like that. And I'll just tell you what the card says very briefly. I have a birth defect called fetal alcohol. I need assistance because of this birth defect. I do not understand abstract concepts like legal rights. And it goes on and on and on. And what I tell people is hire a lawyer, draft such a card, and make sure your kid carries it. What they did in Vancouver was even smarter. They took the card, picture on one side, statement on the other side, and hockey is big in Canada. They took these long hockey laces in fluorescent pink colors. They put a hole in the card, and the kid carried the card around his neck. And so if something happened, some kid would hold up his card on his hockey skate lace, and the police officers, after a while, it only was for a few people, but they became identified to the police officer as that person has a brain that's missing pieces. And so what you have to understand, in the whole justice system, the person with the most discretion is the police officer. The police officer can arrest you, give you a warning. He can do all kinds of things, but it's the police officer that it's that first contact. And sometimes first contact is a bit hard because if a police officer has just spent 15 minutes chasing you down alleyways before he tackles you, the conversation is not going to be the same as, may I see your license and driver's license, please? So I think that those are the kinds of things.
I think I'm just listening to you talk, David. It's absolutely fantastic because, you know, I'm speaking personally as well as professionally, and the parents and carers that we support. It can feel a little bit like watching a car crash in slow motion, you know, as your child reaches those early teen years and into adulthood, and having just exactly what you've said, some really practical strategies, some proactive things that you can go and do that, you know, don't take too much time. They don't, you know, it's very, very doable. That is going to be such a big help to the people that we support.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Here's the greatest parenting tool: a cell phone. These kids have a cell phone. You can put locators on this cell phone so you know where your child is. You can put the cell phone so that when the numbers come up, calls mom, calls the caregiver, just one button. You can put information on here. You can have his pictures, and you can have a brief statement from the parents. My son has. These are fabulous devices, and people that use them correctly can save their kids so much things. Say your kid's 17, 18 years old. He's working in a cleaning dishes in a fish and chip shop. Well, the shop can phone home and say, Billy's shift is over. He's headed home. Click. Got that. And when he goes somewhere, many of these kids have court orders where they're not allowed to associate with certain people. They're not allowed to go certain places. No contact, no go orders. Well, the phone can tell you if he's not to be at the mall, which is a North American. I don't know if you've got malls in England, but the
Call them
phone
shopping
can tell you.
centers.
Yes.
Shopping centers. Yeah.
Yeah.
You English got a word for everything. But I think at the end of the day, there's so much technology that we can use, and a cell phone, everybody's got them, and you know they're if they lose them, because they will lose them. But there are so many functions on here that you can learn, and you can teach the kid how to record things. If they're in trouble, record what's going on,
Yeah.
because you'd be surprised when these matters go to tell, their memory is not going to be perfect. But if you get them right away, it's different. If we well, let me just backtrack very quickly. Julie Conry, you might want to get a paper out and write this down. Take the word alarm and write it vertically on your paper, ALARRM. A day is, and this is how you check. This is a quick diagnostic tool. And this is what we teach the police in Canada. Teach the police this tool so that they can get a sense of what's going on. And oh, hang on, I got to squeeze. There we go. So A stands for adaptive behaviors. Adaptive behaviors are all those secret social rules that you just absorb in your culture. You know, let's find something very English. You don't, at someone's funeral, turn to the widow and ask her, well, how do you think the FA Cup is doing? We've learned at funerals, you wear black, you're quiet, and your stuff like that. Well, to my clients, that's right over their heads. So adaptive behaviors, like have they adapted socially? That's why I talked to you about the Vineland scales, invaluable tool. Second is for learning or language. They speak above their cognitive ability. They have a learning deficit. They have struggle with problems. Could be handwriting, could be something. But there's a learning aspect because of the brain missing pieces that they don't get. A stands for attention. My clients have the attention span of a grasshopper. And it becomes so apparent when you're interviewing them. You're like, oh, and that's why skillful interviewers take breaks, bring in an apple, here, have a sandwich. R is for reasoning. Here's the best example of faulty reasoning. I told you not to fight at school. I told you not to fight at school. I told you not to fight at school. I wasn't. It was on the way home. So there's a failure there to abstract an obvious rule to the greater rule. M stands for memory. And this is just a very brief thing about this. They can't remember stuff, short-term and long-term. Well, memory is the building block of our lives. If you can't remember what you learned on Tuesday and use it Thursday, you're going to have problems. If you can't remember, he is really a bad guy, I shouldn't go out with him. If you can't remember things, long-term and short-term, you're going to run into stone walls at full speed. You're just not going to get it. So again, this alarm tool, we teach the police. It's a really good tool. That's the short version of it. And I think that parents need to educate the police. And there's some ways to do this. One is go meet them. Here's my son. He's going to be a problem. Here's the binder. Next way is parents should run for election and get on the school board. They should get on the local council. They should get on to everybody in the democratic worlds. We have police commissions. That's civilians who are elected to a position to supervise the police. That's one of the most powerful positions in the world, is to be a civilian on the board that supervises the police. You want to make changes? That's where you make changes. Here's another change parents should do. You should go to the local law society. Every law society has what is called continuing legal education. I teach these courses, and lawyers have to have so many credits every year. And so they have to take these courses. And some of these courses are bloody expensive. And a lot of lawyers take them by computer, which means they can turn on the computer and do work. They're a bunch of crooks. But the Law Society teaches lawyers continuing legal education. And they do this in two ways. The Law Society of British Columbia publishes these guides: how to interview, how to do real estate, how to speak to a criminal client, how to start a family file. And they print these things online. And for years, I used to take mine to court. How to speak the sentence, because there's about 3 pages, got to cover this, got to cover. And so now what the Law Society of British Columbia has done, in the criminal interview checklist, the Law Society has put in, consider fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. And to most lawyers, you might as well be saying ooga booga, ooga booga. But now the Law Society has said, hey, this is a problem. So that's one way to help. And I can't stress enough, if you want to get elected to the library board, because that's the people who choose the books for your community. And I could send you a whole long list of books. And there's some great research out there. I'm sure you know who Anne Streisguth is. Her 2 books are foundational. Diane Malbin is the best in the West. Here's her latest book. I mean, goes this way. That's the third. Here's mine with all of the dog-eared dog tags on it. But there's a lot of material out there that parents can access. And again, you need to be gentle, because many parents, especially parents that adopt children, they have big hearts. But when you break a big heart, it's hard to fix. People who take in children really do a powerful service for all of us. But we don't think about how hard it is. The first question a lawyer asks a client, that I do, is, are you adopted? Because most of the children that I see with fetal alcohol come from adoptive families. And there's a whole history to that, and there's a whole reason for that. But that's, again, one of the things you look for. And I'm trying to look at what your question was. I wrote it down here.
David, do you think, can I just ask you a quick question? Do you think...
Absolutely.
No, just because obviously, like on here tonight is both Gemma and I, we're both adopted parents. We've both got children with fetal alcohol. But I wonder, because we talk about this all the time, about the statistics. definitely, when we're talking about prevalence, mean that there's way more people that are not adopted that have FASD. So is that the stigma really, and they're just in this cycle of family, biological family, where it's not going to be recognized, and the voices of the adoptive parents and families are stronger, do you think? Or are we just, I don't know, that it's big hearts. I just don't know if we're just like totally driven to try and get the best for our children.
Okay, huge question. Huge question.
Sorry.
Let me start to answer. No, it's an excellent question. I always like this question. So I'm looking at the thing called the lawyer's brief,
Yeah.
which is on my website, and I'm looking at number 4, and it says, "Go past judgment and understand why pregnant women drink alcohol. The best indicator of how much a woman drinks is how much does her partner drink." So when you want to look at women alcohol in pregnancy, I'll just read it. It's very difficult. This is difficult and requires a heartfelt, clear-minded knowledge of family, violence, history of close relationships, poverty, lack of education, and addiction, and understand how people cope with daily difficulty. FASD is not restricted to poor white Canadians. Rich stockbrokers have wives who binge drink while pregnant. Young, educated, professional women binge drink almost as a rite of passage, often not knowing they're pregnant. And so it's really understanding people is the key, because no one sets out to harm their pregnant child. People don't say, "I'm going to go get 4 bottles of scotch and really screw up my kid's life." No one says that. And pregnant women do drink. And so you want to look at what's going on, the stresses, the addictions, and all the difficult things, what kind of partners they have. And there's some very good news. There's an organization in Seattle, Washington, which is the American state just south of here. And what they did was really smart. They found a bunch of women who were addicted to drugs and alcohol and all kinds of stuff. They took them into the university, they cleaned them up, they gave them a place to live, and they spent quite a bit of time training them. And then they hired these women as outreach worker at the university. Let's go back to the community you were in. Let's go back to the community of your addictions and all those people and find them. And you work with that person. Well, they did this for 4 or 5 years. And eventually the university says, "We kind of can't afford this anymore." The city of Seattle said, "We'll pay for it." The number of ambulance calls, the number of problems in hospitals, the number of problems in schools was reduced so that the city said, "There's money in this program. We can spend money on this program and we get benefits." Ambulances are expensive. School board meetings, school board, times in the principal's office, all of these social costs of behavior that doesn't fit in gets expensive. And so there's no magic pill. There's no one thing that's going to fix everything. But it really is a series of small steps that universities and people like you can do. And it's an uphill climb, because at the end of the day, politicians only worry about one person: voters. And I can tell you that my clients don't vote. They probably don't understand it, don't see it as part of their life. I can tell you something else too. Women who are caregivers and exhausted and just beat down at the end of the day, they don't vote either. They got other things on their mind. And so you have to really think about that. How do we get voters to vote that know something about fetal alcohol? And that's, well, to me, that's the number one problem. Political awareness. You've got to get these parents into political action groups where they get together, they go to judges, they go to politicians, they go to the school board, and they say, "We represent these children, and they're overlooked for a number of reasons that we can all talk about. Yes, they cause problems, And there are some solutions, and we want to help you work with these solutions. And having that conversation is very difficult, but there is no other way. There's not going to be a drug. There's not going to be some sort of magic machine that's going to touch our kid's brain and he's fixed. It's permanent, and it's brain damage, and it's invisible. Yes, there are the eyes and the nose, but that's like 2 or 3% of the population. And so I think that you have to somehow educate parents. And the best book on that, are you ready for this, Gemma? Rules for Radicals, written in 1965 by Saul Alinsky. Saul did his PhD on Al Capone, but he is the leader of all social organizations. Rules for Radicals. And if your parents, and he tells you how to organize. And if you can organize the parents group, somebody else who did this really well, you're too young, Gemma, but Joanne may remember this. The women, the feminists, had a thing called consciousness rating meetings. And the women would get together in someone's house. I don't know if you remember the famous English beauty pageant that the women showed up and burned all those bras.
Yeah.
That kind of collective action is consciousness raising. So you get parents together, and the first thing you're going to find out is what they want to talk about is how tired they are. They want to talk about how difficult it is. And that's the first stage. And the second stage is, what are we going to do about it? And then the third stage is, you want to hit the right level. And that's why I said school board, library board, police commission. Yes, it would be nice if Sylvie would go and become a member of parliament. That would be tremendous. She'd bring the IQ of the place, probably double the IQ of the place. And I think that that's a bit much. So you start with what you can do. And school board is one of the most important aspects, because these kids don't do well in school. But the school has to spend a lot of money taking care of these problems kids. Because every teacher will tell you, if they got 25 or 30 kids in the class, 2 or 3 of them take up 90% of her time. These are the discipline problems. And that's why we have special education teachers, educational consultants, education assistants, because the idea that everybody has the same brain, which was the dominant idea in schools until about 10 years ago, costs money. It costs money when you assume everybody's got the same brain, because now you have to deal with the failures. Many of my clients are called social passes. Some of them at age 17 and 18 can barely read and write. Why? Because they were a pain in the ass in class, and they just moved them along, you know? And I think something which we don't talk about enough is sports. 2 things I want to talk to you about sports. Sports is a confidence builder because it gives you confidence. The big muscles, you're coordinated. And if you're coordinated, you can dance, you can walk, you can talk. And so sports develops the big muscles. Sports gives you friends for life. There's a reason England and Scotland and Europe is bloody crazy about soccer. These soccer hooligans and fights and all the scarves you guys wear and the singing at the football stadium. Sports gives you friends forever. My clients have no friends. They're all alone. And some of them, like one of my clients, there's a question here about my client Melvin. He was a hell of a basketball player. He was really good. And so that's how they found out. The Detroit Police Department, 30, 40 years ago, had a real problem in Detroit. And I don't know if you know much about Detroit. It's a hard place. And so what the police chief did is he started what is called the Police Athletic League. You can go look it up. They would hire college basketball players to be police officers. They didn't do any police work. They went into the ghettos and they played basketball with these kids. 2 things happened. They started to sort out who were the real troublemakers and who were just the kids who were unhappy. But the second thing they did is they brought sports into these kids' lives. And basketball is bigger in the United States than soccer is in England. So what this police chief did was really, really, really smart. It was intelligence gathering on who the real criminals are. And it gave kids something positive in their lives. In my province, the insurance company, to stop cars from stealing, the police knew who these 10 or 20 kids in Vancouver were stealing most of the cars. So the insurance company offered to hire someone to play basketball with them. because it stopped theft of cars. So I'm not sure that I'm a bit worried, Gemma, that I'm rambling around like some old guy in a fish and chip shop. But
At all, not at all. It's fascinating. Everything you're saying, I just think is really, really interesting and so relevant, you know, to our work and what we think about every day. I was gonna kind of jump in and ask you a question because it ties in, you know, brilliant answer talking about, you know, how parents and carers can help and these little steps, you know, in the uphill climb. Can we kind of think again about the justice system if you kind of take that line of thought and put it to just what do you think, what kinds of justice system reforms do you think are most urgently kind of needed for individuals with FASD?
you're not going to change the justice system.
No.
Let that boat go. What you can change is one judge at a time. And that's
I'm
the
really
key.
getting the, you know, all the theme of what you're talking about. And you know, I want to go and organize a rally. I want to go and organize a march. I want to set up groups. So
It's quite, I knew you would be thinking that. I was thinking, oh, so next we'll be saying, right,
yes,
let's get a group of parents to do this. And
yes,
it just seems to make perfect sense when
Perfect.
we
You
look
need,
at the
Gemma,
challenges.
Yeah.
you need to read Rules for Radicals.
I will. I've Googled it. I'm gonna get it.
You need to understand
because I
that the
think
world changes one conversation at a time.
yeah.
Now, going to a demonstration, that's kind of exciting. And I did all of that when I was a kid. But I want to emphasize this. In England, you have, like in my country, you have a prosecution service. I'm not too sure what they call them. When I watched the movie Shetland, they're called fiscals. Never quite understood what that was. But you have prosecutors and you have defense counsel. And defense counsel are of two types. The type you pay £10,000 a minute for, or legal aid. I'm not too sure what you guys call it. So
Yeah, we have legal aid.
both of those, both prosecutions and legal aid have continuing legal education courses they have to take. So what you do is you have a lunch. You organize it with the Law Society so that coming to your lunch is worth a credit. So you have a lunch. You invite 10 or 15 legal aid lawyers, and you sit down and you think about this. You think about this because you want to do this in less than half an hour because the lawyer's attention span is about 30 seconds. So you want to have a lunch, and you're going to have 10 or 20 lawyers there, maybe, whatever. And you're going to have a couple of people who are smart like you, Gemma. And you're going to say, here's some printed materials. You know, you could use the lawyer's brief. You use anything on my website. And what I would do is on my website, I have those 2 8-minute films. Have you watched them?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
I will.
Show them. They're 8 minutes. And then you say, we want to talk about fetal alcohol as continuing legal education. We want you to encourage you to buy this one book, you know, and then you say, really, what we want you to do is we want you to read page 22 and page 31, and you go look at it about primary and secondary characteristics and make it really brief, get a lunch. And you will find that if you have 20 lawyers, 1 or 2 will get it. And then if you have another lunch and you invite 2, maybe 3 judges. I don't know. I don't know your system, but we have provincial court, Supreme Court, Court of Appeal, Supreme Court of Canada. You and I don't speak to Court of Appeal judges. Trust me. And even speaking to a Supreme Court judge, they tend to be very fine people. But there are magistrates. I think that's what you call them in England. I'm not sure.
Yeah,
They're
we
the
do.
lowest court. There's provincial court judges. They are the workhorses of the system. Okay. And they're selected. You know, you don't get too many dummies anymore. And so what I would do is I would say, let's just say this is the, what's your organization called? FAS Hub. This is the FAS Hub lunch. And say to the judge, Gemma is inviting you to lunch. She will be with her friend Sylvia, and they want to have a bit of a chat, and we want to give you a present. And you give them this book, and you spend 5 minutes talking about the book, and you spend the rest of the time talking about you. This is what I do. This is what I do. I've heard about you and what you do, because computers are amazing. You can put in the judge's name and read his cases. And so you want to find a judge that does criminal law cases that seems to have a good heart. And you can find it out. You can look at his case, stay away from that guy. And every lawyer will tell you the same thing. And so you find 2 or 3 judges and you have them for lunch. You give them a present. You make sure you pay for their lunch and you give them the book. That's called judicial education. That's the only way you're going to change the judicial system, because nobody in Parliament, we had a lady in Parliament in Ottawa, and she wanted to pass a law and she needed universal consent. That means everybody has to say yes. All she wanted was a label on alcohol bottle that says, pregnant women shouldn't drink alcohol. It was a very simple statement. And 2 guys objected. So forget about Parliament, and in England, I'm sure it's the same thing. We had the same problem. If you're too young to remember this, but Joanne and I will tell you about the fights about cigarette packages 25 and 30 years ago. Yeah. Anyways, there's a whole bunch of literature on that. You can take a look at that. But I think if you want to change the judicial system, you have to be very clear what your target is. Okay, here are these 2 judges we want to target. Okay, we're going to set up a system, and here's how you do it. It's very simple. You're going to laugh. You phone up his secretary, and you say, my name is Gemma. I'm and we would like to give the judge a book, and we'd like to have him for a lunch on whatever day next week he's available. Okay, trust me, judges eat lunches every day. So I think that's the first step to changing the system. Do the same thing for prosecutors. You can have 10 or 20 prosecutors. Or if you know a prosecutor who's a decent chap, there are some, and you can find some defense counsel, that's a good thing. The advantage in prosecutors is they get paid a salary, okay? They're overloaded, but they don't have to go out there and grind for clients. Defense counsel eat what they kill. So they have to go get clients, and they have to get on the list and get on this list. And being a defense counsel is it's a hard job, because the money is not as good as you think it is.
I think probably in this country, it's like there is such a lot of legal aid. That's where you really need to start, at that ground level, where that's where individuals probably end up at the first stage, especially with FASD, because it seems to start at a low level and then it seems to escalate. So you need to get in with the people who first see them, really. So the local police and the next levels up, to try and avoid that obvious escalation without scaffolding and support. So I would just like to say we are coming to the end, but I would just like to offer the chance.
You just started.
I know, but we only do an hour.
I have all this stuff to tell you.
Well, you have to come back again. You have to come back again.
We'll have to get all of the resources, everything that you've talked about and the things that you want to talk about, and we need to put them up with the webinar, don't we? So that everybody.
Yeah, we do. And I think we should definitely do another one.
Definitely.
This has just been some amazing
Give me 30 seconds.
I will.
Okay. Buy this book.
Oh, okay.
Police for the Future.
He's an expert. I talked to him. Professor Bailey, he's an expert. This will shock you what police really do. All the detective and murder mystery stuff, that's not what police do. Okay? Buy this book. Oxford University Press. That's a clue. He's a somebody. Buy this book. There we go. It's Dr. Ratey, Spark. And one of the big sparks was a woman in Canada, of course. But anyways, this is about sports. This is about athletics. This is about brains. And this is about understanding what police really do. because you have no idea what police really do because you watch too much television. Police work is boring. It is boring. And it's necessary. Anyways, so I understand what you're going to do is you're going to call me. We're going to set something up soon because I got lots more. I have
I think
donuts
it would
and
be
lemonade and
it would be amazing, David. I think we need to do this one first, and we need to get our our community to be able to join us live. I think that would be ideal.
Yeah.
I think it would offer so much to so many that we work with. But I just want to really thank
a
you.
shout when you want to do this again.
We will do. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
It's
David.
been amazing, and we'll definitely be in touch for another one. Thank you so much.